In just 1 year of running, I've transformed from a marathon newbie to a 3-time marathoner now, with a 4th race just on the horizon. With no long distance running experience previously, besides a cheeky 5k here and there, I've managed to shave almost an hour off of my personal best time. Today, I'm excited to share how my running has evolved in this past year. We'll cover my race results, training strategies, as well as my nutrition choices, whilst trying to answer the main question here: what actually led to such a significant improvement in my marathon time? Let's get into it. To set the scene for this video, why not start with a marathon overview for each of the 3 marathons that I've completed. Starting off with the New York City Marathon that I ran on the 5th of November 2023. The temperatures ranged from 9 to 17 degrees Celsius or 49 to 63 degrees Fahrenheit, and definitely felt a lot warmer towards the later parts of the race. As a marathon newbie, with New York being my first ever marathon, did not realize how much of an impact that elevation gain on the course would impact me. Heading over from Australia to run that race last year, also being briefed that the crowd support on the New York City Marathon course was like no other, and wow, I was totally in for a surprise and a shock when I got there. And my personal expectation going in to run my first ever marathon, thinking that I'd go sub 3 hours 30 and run the entire time. How I was so wrong with that expectation. My second marathon was the Ballarat Marathon, hosted on the 28th of April in 2024 this year. The temperatures for Ballarat ranged from 8 to 13 degrees Celsius or 48 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and were much more ideal temperature conditions for me, being a completely sunny day with perfect conditions throughout. It was a 2-lap, relatively flat marathon course with a strategically placed hill right before the finishing line. My personal expectations and the reason I actually signed up for the race was to beat my New York City Marathon time. With a second marathon training block under my belt, I felt way more confident and prepared to respect the distance. My third marathon was the most recent Chicago Marathon, held on the 13th of October in 2024. The temperatures ranged from 9 to 18 degrees Celsius or 49 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, with a slight breeze throughout the race. I mean, it is the Windy City after all. Luckily, I didn't get the worst of it, which sounded like it happened towards the later half of the day on the Sunday. It was actually one of the better days to have the marathon on, with the weather, the days prior leading into it, relatively warm, but also afterwards having a massive day of rain and almost just staying indoors for the most of it too, so couldn't complain there. Only experienced some difficulties in the final 12 kilometers with the warmth out there, finding my body was heating up relatively quickly. The course was pancake flat, with Mount Roosevelt appearing just before getting to the final 200 meters of the race. I didn't let that one take my soul. Personal expectations going into this race was to set a new PB of sub 3 hours 30 and aiming to do a negative split in the second half of the marathon. If you're keen to see a full breakdown, I'll leave a video card up here on the screen now. With my 3rd consecutive marathon training block completed, wanted to see just how much I could improve on my first ever marathon time that was set just under a year ago. Now, the most important detail, my results for each of my 3 marathons. My New York City Marathon time was 4 hours, 29 minutes and 31 seconds. This worked out to be 6 minutes, 23 seconds per kilometer, or 10 minutes, 16 seconds per mile. For the Ballarat Marathon, I ran that in 3 hours, 43 minutes and 39 seconds, working out to be 5 minutes, 18 per kilometer, or 8 minutes and 31 seconds per mile. Most recently now, the Chicago Marathon, running that in 3 hours, 30 minutes and 51 seconds, working out to be 4 minutes and 59 seconds per kilometer, or 8 minutes and 2 seconds per mile. And as you can see, almost an hour shaved off from my first ever marathon last year. I'm a firm believer that if you want to have a successful marathon running experience, regardless of whatever time you're setting yourself, you need to put in the training. For the New York City Marathon, my entire training program was provided by a coach from April through to November. This was part of the Indigenous Marathon Project, with 6 distinct training blocks scheduled as part of the program. The interesting part to my training last year was my training blocks were actually dedicated and scheduled to hit certain milestone distances. This was a 10-kilometer Mother's Day Classic event held in Canberra, the Gold Coast Half Marathon, a 25-kilometer home-based event here in Melbourne, a 30-kilometer selection event in Alice Springs, before training the final few weeks to run the New York City Marathon. Throughout this training, I was running 4 days a week and strength training twice a week in the gym. And compared to my following 2 marathon trainings, had quite a variety of quality sessions sprinkled through. This included 6 by 1 minute efforts, 5k hitouts, 60 minutes of surge work, so working at my 10-minute pace for 5 kilometers or so before a 5-minute break, and then repeating until I hit the 60-minute mark, hill intervals, and even attending a couple of park runs as well. In the final block of training, I peaked at 77 kilometers for the week, or 47 miles. In terms of issues that came up during my training, first and foremost, I had inflamed peroneal tendons along the side of my feet just before getting to my 10k event in Canberra. I have very flat feet, so before getting to Canberra, consulted with a podiatrist who recommended getting custom orthotics. Luckily, those were ready just before getting to Canberra, and I've used them ever since on my running journey. Secondly, towards the end of my final block of training before getting to New York, experienced shin splints. To aid in recovering just before getting over to New York, had to cross train a couple of times a week to ease the load on my legs. For the Ballarat Marathon, not having a coach this time, I drew inspiration from the Hal Higdon marathon training plans available on his website to create my second marathon training program. This included upping my runs from 4 to 5 times a week and reducing my strength training sessions from 2 to 1 a week in the gym. In this program, I also included 2 new quality sessions. The first being 6 by 800 meter repeats at threshold pace, as well as 4 by 2k repeats at my 10k pace. The reason behind including both of those was to improve my lactate threshold. All of my long run mileage was completed at an easy, comfortable pace with no marathon pace included there. In peak week, I hit 72 kilometers or 44 miles. It was also the first time that I trained in and used carbon plated shoes for the race, being the Hoka Rocket X2s. When it came to training issues, I felt like my second marathon training was almost flawless, only gradually experiencing some minor shin splint pain. Though one difficulty that I would note was the ability to consume my race nutrition in the form of running gels. Throughout this marathon training in particular, it was almost a trial and error experiment to see which gels would actually suit me the best, finding that I responded very much to the different textures of the gels. For the Chicago Marathon, a majority of this was actually based off of my Ballarat one, being 16 weeks and then just wanting to up the mileage slightly more. Again, including 5 days of running per week as well as 1 day of strength. During this training, I peaked at 84 kilometers or 49 miles. I also modified my quality sessions with a 5 by 2k at threshold pace, as well as including a 3 by 3k at marathon pace or faster. This was also the first marathon training where I did incorporate sections of my long runs at marathon pace. However, got a bit too excited in the initial parts of training, finding my body get quite fatigued early on with so many kilometers at marathon pace. It was also the first time where I created a dedicated shoe rotation to suit the training that I was completing, using my Asics Nimbus 26s as my everyday shoe and even for a majority of my long runs, having the Adidas Supernova Risers for more of my weekly mileage to have some comfort on the feet, and finally, using the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Flash for my quality workouts. I ran Chicago in the New Balance SC Elite version 4s, only using those for 3 runs before actually doing the marathon. When it came to training issues for the Chicago Marathon training, surprise, surprise, shin splints occurred very early on in my marathon training actually. I do believe it was from the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Flashes, finding that the sole of those was quite a firm one, and I feel like my body had responded to the plushness of the Nimbus 25s and the 26s that I was using previously. And in my final week of training before hitting the taper, started to experience symptoms of runner's knee on the inner part of my right knee. And looking back now, 50% of my mileage for that week was completed at an easy pace, while the other 50% was pushing way beyond my threshold. So clearly an issue of overtraining there that caused the slight runner's knee problem. When it comes to nutrition, I will first start by saying that I'm one to not really track any of my calories or macros throughout my marathon training, I usually eat and hydrate based on what my body feels like it needs in that given moment. Though I do pay particular attention to my carbohydrate intake during the carb loading phase 3 days before the marathon race. To summarize my New York City marathon training nutrition experience, it was an entire experiment. Right from the hydration and nutrition that I'd take whilst running the marathon, through to eating before and after my runs. Getting further into the marathon training, found my body naturally craving more carbohydrates to fuel it and to recover. And a big lesson in my entire running journey was I didn't quite track my carbohydrates for my first ever marathon, usually going off of feeling full and thinking, okay, that's enough carbs to get me through, I don't need any more. But then after hitting the wall, discovered just how important nutrition was when it comes to running a marathon. My New York City marathon breakfast included 2 pieces of bread with honey on them and a Maurten 360 drink mix. For my on-course nutrition, had 3 Gel 160s and 3 CAF 100s, all Maurten branded. However, I only consumed 4 of them. When it comes to my Ballarat nutrition plan, New York really informed a majority of it, finding that I needed to hydrate appropriately before my long runs, as well as nailing my on-course nutrition. While my diet stayed the same pretty much throughout the training, I did aim to hit 700 grams of carbohydrates in the carb loading phase before Ballarat. And as I discovered SIS would be using their carbohydrate drink mix out on the course, started to use that as an additional fuel source during my training for both my long runs as well as fueling before them. And as a result, running the Ballarat Marathon found I had so much more energy. My marathon breakfast included 1 bagel with honey as well as 500 mils of the SIS carb drink mix. My on-course nutrition was 3 SIS gels and 3 Huma gels. The Chicago Marathon nutrition was almost a carbon copy of Ballarat. However, kept in mind that I wouldn't be using the Gatorade Endurance formula out on the course as an additional fuel source. To supplement this, decided that I'd take 4 electrolyte replacement tablets that I'd stuck to my gels, taking them throughout the marathon. Weirdly, throughout this training, found myself craving energy drinks more than anything, so I felt like my body was depleted a lot of its sodium. This is where I started to become very diligent with hydration and ensuring that I would consume a full carbohydrate drink mix the day before a long run, where I started to sweat out a majority of my sodium stores. I did find carb loading over in the US by myself this time a little challenging, opting to usually do takeaway in the form of McDonald's or Shake Shack, and then also using liquid carbohydrates to consume and get as many carbs into my body as possible. My marathon breakfast included 2 pieces of bread with peanut butter and honey on them, 500 mils of Gatorade and 1 electrolyte tablet. My Chicago race nutrition was 3 SIS gels that were fruit salad flavored and 3 SIS gels that were berry flavored and caffeinated. I also consumed 3 additional electrolyte tablets out there. Reflecting on my results, training, as well as my ongoing journey with nailing my nutrition, realized that I've got quite a few key insights that I'd love to share about this evolution in my marathon journey. Firstly, I believe getting my nutrition right is what actually led me to run the entire marathon distance in my second and third marathons. From hitting the wall at the 28-kilometer mark in my first ever marathon to finishing with a smile on my face in my second, just showed how crucial it was to getting my nutrition right for the marathon distance. From the times where I had to pull up on the side of the footpath to throw up one of the gels that didn't quite sit properly, to that first moment where I actually consumed an entire gel and was able to keep running. Those moments led to that point in being able to run the entire time. I feel like my previous strength training regime actually helped me stay relatively injury-free throughout all of my marathon training. Before marathon training, I was in the gym about 5 to 6 times a week doing strength training. I believe this provided a very strong foundation, particularly for my legs, as my mileage started to ramp up during the training blocks. Increasing the days that I spend running has also developed my endurance. By upping my running days from 4 days a week through to 5, found my endurance improved significantly and saw this difference between my second and third marathons, finding that in Chicago, I felt a lot more fresher further into the marathon than I did when running Ballarat. And that's also exemplified in the differences between my result times there. Lastly is that the marathon distance continues to humble me. Even though I've managed to set a new PB for every marathon that I've ran since New York, still find myself struggling through the entire 42 kilometers. It's never easy. In Chicago, it was just as much of a physical and mental battle as it was in New York for my first ever one. Even more so, the realization that if I ever do want to achieve my elusive goal of hitting a Boston qualifier, know that it's going to hurt to get it. Yet here I am already signed up for my 4th marathon next year. So there we have it, friends. This is how my marathon result times have improved over the course of just on a year of running now. And I myself know that I've still got so much to improve on, being so new to long distance running too. So I hope that these videos and this channel in particular can show that as someone who's come from little long distance running experience, setting my sights to Boston qualify, which is now a sub 2 hour 55 marathon, that we mere mortals who are working full-time jobs and juggling everything else in life can still achieve those grand goals. Though that might not be next year, or it might not even be the year after, that's one thing that I can promise to all of you watching, that no matter how hard things get, I'm still going to try and I'm still going to upload to show you what progress can look like. Because I'm not like a lot of other runners documenting their running journeys and suddenly running sub 3 hour marathons. I'm an everyday average person, just like yourself, just really found a love for long distance running and completing marathons. Over to you now. What's something you enjoy about running, or the distance that you're training for? I'd be keen to hear more about those in the comments below. If you are keen to see what my marathon journey has looked like, I'll leave my New York City marathon video here, as well as my most recent Chicago video here for you to choose to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jack, and I'll see you next time. Catch ya.